My name is Marin, and I'm 34 years old, and that Thanksgiving was the day I realized my family didn't see me anymore. Thanksgiving used to be my favorite holiday. I loved the smell of cinnamon and roasted turkey, the way the house filled with laughter and clinking silverware, and how for one night a year, it was supposed to feel like everyone belonged. But that illusion shattered last year the moment I realized my family had stopped seeing me as one of them a long time ago. My mother has always been the one to host Thanksgiving at her big country house, 2 stories, freshly painted shutters, and the same old perfect family image she's maintained for decades. She lives for appearances. She insists on matching tablecloths, golden cutlery, candles that never actually get lit, and a dining room so spotless it looks more like a museum than a place to eat. I arrived early that day, just before noon, holding my caramel pecan pie wrapped neatly in foil. It had taken me hours to make. I wanted it to be perfect, like always. I guess part of me still believed that if I showed up with something beautiful, something thoughtful, they'd finally notice me. The front door was already open, laughter spilling out. My brother Connor's voice was the loudest, like always. He'd probably just finished telling one of his stories about his latest business deal or another exotic trip he took with his girlfriend, a woman I'd never met before but had already heard about from my mother at least 10 times. I stepped inside quietly, smiling even though no one looked up. They were all gathered in the living room, my parents, Connor and his girlfriend, my younger sister Haley, and her boyfriend. They were chatting, holding glasses of wine, perfectly comfortable, perfectly unaware that I was even there. I stood in the doorway for a few seconds before clearing my throat. "Hi," I said softly, forcing a smile. My mother turned, her face lighting up but only for a moment. "Oh, Marin, you're here. Put the pie in the kitchen, will you?" "No hug. No. How are you? Just instructions." I nodded, pretending not to mind. In the kitchen, the counters were already overflowing stuffing, cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes, all arranged neatly in dishes that matched my mother's sense of pride. I placed my pie at the edge of the counter and stood there for a moment, trying to shake off the sting of being invisible. When dinner was finally announced, everyone rushed to the dining room. The table looked like something out of a magazine: white china, linen napkins, crystal glasses sparkling under the chandelier. I smiled despite myself, proud of how beautiful it looked. But as everyone found their seats, I froze. There was no chair left for me. At first, I thought maybe I was mistaken. I glanced around, scanning the long table twice. Every seat was filled, my parents at the ends, my siblings, their partners. Even Connor's new girlfriend had a place, sitting comfortably right next to him in what used to be my usual spot. Mom?" I said softly. "I think we're one chair short." She frowned, scanning the table. "Oh, right. Well, you can just grab a stool from the kitchen, sweetheart." Her tone was casual, dismissive, like I'd asked for something unreasonable. Everyone kept talking as if nothing had happened. No one offered to move, no one seemed to care. Connor laughed at something Haley said, their voices overlapping in easy conversation while I stood there, awkward and humiliated, feeling my cheeks burn. I went to the kitchen and grabbed a wooden stool, the kind that made your back ache if you sat too long. I pulled it up to the corner of the table, slightly out of the circle, barely close enough to reach the mashed potatoes. My feet didn't quite touch the ground, and I tried not to let anyone see how much it bothered me. Dinner went on like nothing was wrong. They toasted, laughed, passed dishes across the table, but no one passed anything to me. Every time I reached out, the bowl or plate was already moving to someone else. It was like I didn't exist. My mother told stories about Connor's new job promotion, how proud she was of him. Haley talked about her boyfriend's upcoming proposal, and everyone clapped and cheered. I smiled when they looked my way, nodding at the right times, saying, "Congratulations," even though the words felt hollow. Not once did anyone ask me how I was doing. Not once did they mention the big promotion I'd gotten last month, the one I'd worked years for. I'd been waiting for a moment to bring it up, but the opportunity never came. Every time I tried to speak, someone cut me off with something more important. The pie I made sat untouched on the counter, forgotten like me. At one point, Connor's girlfriend, blonde, perfect, polite, turned to me and asked, "So, what do you do again?" Before I could answer, my mother interrupted, saying, "Marin works at some firm, dear. She's always been the practical one. The practical one. Not successful. Not accomplished. Just practical." I looked at the table again, at all the chairs filled with people who had never noticed the space they left empty for me, and it hit me that this wasn't about a chair at all. It was about everything I'd been missing my whole life, the respect, the acknowledgement, the place at the table I'd been fighting for since childhood. I smiled to hide the pain and lifted my glass quietly in a small toast to myself. That was the exact moment something inside me quietly broke. My family had always been experts at pretending everything was perfect. If you looked at us from the outside, you'd think we were the kind of family who had it all together. The polished photos in the hallway, the smiling Christmas cards, the polite laughter at dinner parties, it was all a carefully curated illusion. My mother took pride in that image more than she took pride in the people in it. She used to tell me, "Marin, people respect families that look put together." I think that's what she really wanted, respect, not love. She was raised poor, and the idea of appearing flawless was her lifelong mission. My father played along. He'd worked as a doctor for over 30 years and loved being admired for his success. Together, they built an image, not a family. Connor was their golden ticket, the eldest child, the golden boy. He inherited my father's confidence and my mother's ambition. He never failed at anything, at least, that's what they liked to believe. Every story at dinner started with "when Connor" and ended with applause. Haley, my little sister, was the opposite, delicate, emotional, and always the baby. She could do no wrong, even when she messed up spectacularly. My parents rushed to her defense like she was some fragile porcelain doll. She grew up knowing she didn't have to try too hard, she'd always be adored. And then there was me, the middle child, the buffer. The one expected to stay quiet, smile politely, and fill whatever gap existed between the other two. My life, my opinions, my feelings, they were background noise. That Thanksgiving made it clearer than ever. I sat there on that stool, balancing awkwardly while everyone else leaned back comfortably in their cushioned chairs. I tried to eat without drawing attention to myself, even though every bite felt heavier than the last. The turkey was perfectly cooked, the mashed potatoes creamy, the cranberry sauce sweet, but everything tasted bland to me. I couldn't taste food when I felt invisible. Haley laughed loudly at something Connor said, tossing her hair back like she was on camera. My mother nodded approvingly, clearly proud of her beautiful, charming daughter. My father kept his focus on his wine glass, half listening, half judging. That was his specialty, judging without saying a word. At one point, my mother asked Connor's girlfriend, "So, do you and Connor have plans for Christmas yet?" I glanced up, waiting to see if anyone would notice I hadn't been asked the same question. They didn't. Connor smiled confidently. "Yeah, we're thinking of taking a trip to Aspen. Mom, you and Dad should join us for a few days." My mother's eyes lit up like she'd just been invited to a royal ball. "Oh, that sounds wonderful." I sipped my water quietly. No one asked what my Christmas plans were. Then, out of nowhere, Haley looked at me and said, "Marin, are you still in that apartment of yours? The small one?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, it's cozy." She nodded, smirking. "I don't know how you do it, I'd feel claustrophobic." My mother chuckled, as if it was a harmless joke. "Not everyone needs a big space, dear. Marin's always been simple." Simple. That word sat in my stomach heavier than the food. I looked around the table, wondering if they even realized how cruel they sounded. But they didn't. They never did. It wasn't that they were trying to hurt me, they just didn't think of me at all. I tried to remind myself that I was a grown woman. I had a career I was proud of. I paid my bills, I traveled, I built a life that didn't depend on anyone's approval. But sitting there, surrounded by people who should have cared about me, like the overlooked child I'd always been. After dinner, I offered to help clear the table. My mother waved her hand. No, dear. Let Haley and me handle it. You've been sitting. Relax." That comment stung more than she realized. sitting. As if I hadn't been working all week, as if I hadn't carried my own weight for years. I stood anyway, gathering plates and taking them into the kitchen. I watched from there as they continued laughing, joking, living in their perfect little world that didn't have room for me. When I returned to grab more dishes, my father caught my eye. For a brief moment I thought he might say something kind. Something that acknowledged me. But he didn't. He just said, "Don't forget to rinse before putting them in the sink." It was such a small thing, but it hit like a slap. I finished cleaning quietly, my mind buzzing. I couldn't help thinking about how things had always been this way, birthdays where my gifts were practical, moments where my accomplishments were brushed aside, times when I'd been told to be grateful even when ignored. My family didn't hate me, they just didn't see me. And the cruelest part? I had let them do it for years. When I finally sat down again, still on that uncomfortable stool, my back ached. Everyone was finishing dessert, laughing about some story from years ago that I barely remembered. I looked around and realized not one of them noticed how quiet I'd been all night. I stared at the pie I'd made, untouched. My mother had decided to serve her pumpkin pie instead, saying mine was too sweet for everyone's taste. I smiled weakly and said, "That's fine." But inside, something shifted, something I couldn't quite name yet. I looked at each of their faces, my mother, flawless and controlling. My father, detached and proud. Connor, charming and smug. Oblivious and adored, and I finally saw what I had been refusing to admit my whole life. They weren't going to change. They weren't suddenly going to notice me, respect me, or value me the way I wanted them to. They didn't forget my chair, they forgot me. And once I realized that, I stopped trying to earn my place at their table. That's when I realized they didn't just forget my chair, they forgot me. It wasn't the first time I'd been made to feel small by the people who were supposed to love me most. As I sat there that night, pretending to be part of the conversation, memories started creeping in, little moments from years ago that I thought I'd buried. I've always had this habit of forgiving too quickly, convincing myself that things would get better. But sometimes old wounds don't heal just because you ignore them, they just scar over until someone rips them open again. I remembered being 10 years old, sitting cross-legged on the front porch, watching Connor ride the brand new bike our parents had given him for his birthday. It was bright red, with shiny chrome handles that sparkled in the sun. He looked so proud, zooming up and down the driveway while everyone clapped and cheered. My birthday had been 2 months earlier. I got a sweater that was on sale. My mother told me I should be thankful it was practical. Even back then I noticed the difference. Connor got celebrations. I got reminders to be grateful. And then there was Haley. She was the baby, so naturally, everyone adored her. I remember when she spilled juice all over my homework, crying until I took the blame so she wouldn't get in trouble. My father told me I was a good big sister for protecting her. I wasn't protecting her, I was learning that my feelings didn't matter. Every Thanksgiving, every family gathering followed the same script. Connor in the spotlight, Haley as the darling, and me as the background character holding it all together. As I grew older, I started realizing that my family's love had conditions. You had to earn it, but only in the ways they approved of. Connor earned it by being successful, Haley earned it by being beautiful, and I tried to earn it by being useful. By doing things right, by staying quiet. But quiet people are easy to forget. That stool I sat on that night was more than just uncomfortable, it was symbolic. It was every time I'd been sidelined, every time I'd been told to be patient, to be understanding, to not make a scene. My life had been one long act of minimizing myself to make others comfortable. And suddenly, I was done. I stared at the people around, and the table, trying to understand how love could feel so cold. My mother's laughter rang through the air, a sharp, rehearsed sound. My father was nodding at something Connor said about investments. Haley was scrolling through her phone, pretending to listen. They were my family, but they felt like strangers. I used to think that family meant unconditional love, no matter what. But that night, I realized that unconditional only applied when it came to them forgiving each other, not when it came to me. I'd been expected to show up every year, help clean up, smile in photos, and act grateful for being included at all. I played along because I was afraid that if I stopped, I'd lose them completely. But sitting there on that stool, watching them eat pie I hadn't even been offered, I started wondering if losing them would really be such a bad thing. I thought back to Aunt Ruth, my mother's older sister. She'd always been different. She never married, never had kids, and the family quietly judged her for it. But she was kind. She used to tell me stories about her travels, her art, her life outside of our family's judgmental little bubble. She saw me when no one else did. I remember once, when I was 12, she caught me crying in her garden after a particularly harsh comment from my mother. She sat down beside me, handed me a cookie, and said, "You don't need to shrink to fit into other people's stories, Marin. Write your own." Those words stuck with me all these years, though I never truly understood them until that moment at the table. Because that night, I realized I'd spent my entire life trying to fit into their version of who I should be, and all it got me was a missing chair. After dinner, I excused myself early, pretending I wasn't feeling well. No one protested. My mother just said, "Get some rest, dear," already focused on wrapping leftovers for Connor and Haley to take home. I walked out into the cold night air, my hands shaking not from anger, but from clarity. The drive home was silent except for the hum of the tires on the road. I replayed everything in my head, the ignored conversations, the subtle insults, the years of being the quiet one. By the time I reached my apartment, I felt something I hadn't felt before. Resolve. I wasn't going to keep letting them treat me like furniture, something convenient when needed, forgotten when not. I'd spent my whole life giving them love, loyalty, and understanding, but they'd never given any of it back. For once, I wanted to see what it felt like to stop trying. To stop pleasing. To stop chasing validation that was never going to come. When I got home, I took off my coat, placed the untouched pie on my kitchen counter, and just stared at it. It looked perfect, but no one had wanted it just like me. I cut a slice for myself, sat down, and took a bite. It was sweet, rich, and comforting. And that's when I realized something so simple. It almost made me laugh. I didn't need them to notice me to prove I was worth something, but that didn't mean I would forgive them. I'd always believed revenge was beneath me, that it belonged to bitter people who couldn't move on. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't about bitterness. Maybe it was about balance. And as I finished the last bite of that pie, I made a quiet promise to myself. The next time they looked at me, they wouldn't see the forgotten middle child. They'd see someone they never should have underestimated. I started to plan my quiet revenge. What no one knew was that I wasn't just the invisible daughter, I was the executor of my late aunt's estate. Aunt Ruth had passed away 6 months before that Thanksgiving, and while my family mourned her publicly, I was the only one who truly grieved her. She wasn't just my mother's sister, she was my refuge. The one person in our family who had never made me feel small. I remember when her lawyer, Samuel Pierce, first called me after the funeral. His voice was calm and professional, but there was warmth in it too. "Miss Turner," he'd said, "your aunt named you as executor of her estate. There are matters we'll need to discuss in person." At the time, I didn't think much of it. Aunt Ruth didn't seem like someone who had much to leave behind. She lived modestly, in that creaky old Victorian house full of books and memories. But when I met Samuel in his office, everything I thought I knew changed. Aunt Ruth had been quietly wealthy. She'd invested smartly over the years in real estate, stocks, even art. The total value of her estate was over $2 million. My jaw must have dropped when I saw the documents. Samuel smiled faintly. "She wanted this handled privately," he said. "She trusted you completely." Those words hit me harder than I expected. Someone trusted me completely. I couldn't remember the last time anyone in my family had said anything close to that. As executor, my job was to manage the assets, pay off debts, and distribute what remained according to her will. But Aunt Ruth's will wasn't straightforward. It was full of handwritten notes, personal reflections, and one final clause that made it unlike anything I'd ever seen. She had divided her wealth among several people, But at the end, she wrote, "To my niece Marin, I leave not only my love but my authority. She will decide, at her discretion, who among this family truly values what matters most. If they value family above greed, they shall receive what is fair. If not, let her judgment stand as mine." I remember staring at that line, my heart racing. It wasn't just a legal responsibility, it was power. Power I'd never had before. I didn't tell anyone in my family. I knew exactly how it would go. My mother would try to take control. Connor would assume he deserved the biggest share. And Haley would flutter her eyelashes and get sympathy. It would all turn into a performance just like every family gathering. So I stayed quiet. For months, I managed everything discreetly, working with Samuel to ensure the estate was properly handled. He was meticulous and kind, guiding me through every step. He admired Aunt Ruth's independence and seemed genuinely invested in making sure her wishes were honored. Sometimes, after meetings, we'd talk about family, his, mine, the strange ways people change when money gets involved. He once said, "Money doesn't change people, Marin. It just shows who they really are." I thought about that a lot. And then came Thanksgiving. That chair they forgot to set for me, it was more than just an oversight. It was proof of everything Aunt Ruth had always warned me about. My family valued appearances, control, and validation, but never love. As I sat on that stool, humiliated and invisible, a thought sparked in my mind. Maybe this was my chance to show them what they'd become. Maybe Aunt Ruth had left that decision to me for a reason. When I got home that night, I dug through my desk drawer until I found the folder Samuel had given me. Estate of Ruth Calloway. I opened it and ran my fingers over the embossed letters. Inside were the documents, bank statements, property deeds, investment portfolios. I reread the will, line by line, and paused at the part where she gave me the authority to decide. I could already picture the chaos that would erupt when they found out I was in charge. But I didn't want chaos for the sake of it. I wanted clarity. I wanted justice. For years, my family had measured love by status, attention, and control. I wanted to teach them what it felt like to be on the outside, to be forgotten, dismissed, uninvited. The plan began forming that night. Quiet, precise, deliberate. I wouldn't lash out or scream. I wouldn't write some angry message or confront them in tears. That would be too easy, too expected. No, I wanted my revenge to come in the form they least understood, grace. I'd use Aunt Ruth's will to hold up a mirror to make them see who they truly were. And there was one person who could help me do it, Samuel. The next morning, I called his office. When he answered, his calm voice steadied me. "Mr. Pierce," I said, "I've made a decision. I'm ready to finalize the distributions." He paused. "Are you sure? You don't have to rush this." "I'm sure," I said firmly. "But I'd like to add a stipulation." He hesitated. "What kind of stipulation?" "The kind that honors the truth of my aunt's words. I want to ensure the inheritance goes only to those who truly value family, however I define that." There was silence for a moment. Then he said quietly, "That's exactly what she wanted." Over the next few days, we met several times, reviewing legal options and drafting documents. Everything had to be precise. Samuel was careful to explain every clause, every possible challenge my family could raise. But as we worked, something shifted between us. He wasn't just a lawyer anymore, he was an ally. He listened when I told him about Thanksgiving, about the missing chair, about the years of being invisible. He didn't laugh or dismiss it as petty. Instead, he said something I'll never forget. "Neglect leaves bruises too, Marin. They just don't show." That was the moment I knew I'd chosen the right person to stand by me. My family had always underestimated me because I was quiet. But they'd soon learn that quiet doesn't mean weak. Aunt Ruth had given me the keys to something bigger than money. She'd given me a way to rewrite the story. So I decided I would. She left me the final decision on who deserved their share. 3 days after Thanksgiving, the lawyer called to set up a meeting. I was still replaying that dinner in my mind, every careless word, every laugh that cut too deep when my phone rang. I glanced at the screen and saw Samuel Pierce. His timing was uncanny, like he somehow knew I needed a reason to shift my focus from pain to purpose. "Miss Turner." His calm voice came through, warm and deliberate. "I wanted to touch base regarding the final estate review. Are you available to meet this week?" There was something comforting about the way he spoke, steady, precise, never rushed. I agreed to meet him the next afternoon. We met at a quiet cafe downtown. The place was small, all dark wood and soft music, the kind of spot where serious conversations could unfold without anyone overhearing. Samuel was already there when I arrived, seated near the window, a folder neatly laid out in front of him. He stood when he saw me, offering a polite smile. "Marin, good to see you." That simple gesture, using my first name, without the formal distance of Miss Turner, made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. I sat across from him, and for the first few minutes, we talked business. He walked me through the legal process, the property transfers, the accounts. Every detail was methodical, exact. But then he closed the folder gently and looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "You seem distracted," he said softly. I gave a small laugh, trying to brush it off. "Family stuff. Thanksgiving." He smiled knowingly. Ah, the great American holiday of forced smiles. That made me laugh for real, short but genuine. He leaned back. "Rough one?" I hesitated, then told him everything. About the dinner, the missing chair, the way they'd looked right through me as if I weren't even there. As I spoke, his expression didn't shift to pity or judgment. He just listened, really listened. When I finished, he said quietly, "Neglect leaves bruises too." I remembered that line from before, but hearing it again, it sank deeper this time. I nodded slowly. It's strange how a simple thing, a chair, can make you see everything clearly. He looked thoughtful. A chair is never just a chair. It's about belonging. For a moment, we just sat there, the weight of that truth hanging between us. Then he cleared his throat and said, "Your aunt was very wise, you know. She gave you the authority to make choices that reflect more than legality. She wanted you to see who deserves what and why." I stirred my coffee absent-mindedly. What if none of them deserve anything? He tilted his head slightly. "Then you'll act according to her wishes. Your judgment becomes hers." I looked at him. Really looked at him. Would that hold up legally? "Yes," he said simply. "As long as it's within the parameters of her will and documented properly. You have discretion. Complete discretion." That word echoed in my mind, discretion. Power. Wrapped in politeness. I smiled faintly. "Then I suppose I'll use it." He nodded approvingly. "Just make sure you do it for the right reasons." That made me pause. I wanted to tell him it wasn't about revenge, it was about balance. About reclaiming my voice. But maybe those two things weren't so different after all. As we talked more about logistics, a bold thought crossed my mind, something that felt poetic in its quiet defiance. I looked at him and said, "Samuel, do you know what my family forgot at Thanksgiving?" He smiled wryly. "Besides their manners?" I laughed. "My chair." He raised an eyebrow, curious. "Your chair?" "They forgot to set one for me," I said softly. "There was a place for everyone else except me. My mother told me to grab a stool from the kitchen." He frowned, shaking his head slightly. "I'm sorry, Marin. That's cold." "Cold, yes," I said. "But useful." He looked puzzled. "Useful how?" I leaned forward, lowering my voice like I was confessing a secret. "Because now I know exactly what to do with Aunt Ruth's inheritance." His brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" I smiled. "I'm going to give the chair to someone who deserves it." He blinked, processing my words. "You mean?" I nodded. "You, Samuel. You're the only person who's treated me with respect through all of this. My family forgot my chair, so I'm giving it to the lawyer." He stared at me, surprised, but there was a softness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Marin, you don't have to. I want to," I said firmly. "You listened when no one else did. You helped me when you didn't have to. You believed in me when my own family couldn't even look at me." He was silent for a long moment, then said gently, "If that's truly what you want to do, I'll make sure everything is done correctly. But promise me something, don't let anger be the only reason you act." I smiled faintly. "Oh, I'm not angry anymore. I'm just awake." He nodded slowly, like he understood exactly what I meant. When we left the cafe, the air outside was crisp, the sky streaked with gray. I stood on the sidewalk, watching him walk away, feeling something inside me shift again, not pain this time, but clarity. My family had always taken and taken, never noticing what they left behind. But I had something now that they didn't. Control. And I would use it not with rage, but with precision. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the forgotten one anymore. That's when I decided the lawyer would get the chair they forgot to give me. If they wanted to ignore me, I'd give them a reason they'd never forget me again. After that meeting with Samuel, I couldn't stop thinking about the conversation the way he'd looked at me when I said I was giving him the chair. It wasn't pity or surprise, it was understanding. For the first time in years, I felt like someone was on my side. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by stacks of documents, property appraisals, account statements, Aunt Ruth's will. The soft hum of the city came through the window, and I realized how silent my place was. No laughter, no judgment, just me, and the sound of paper, rustling, a sound that now meant power. I started organizing everything. If I was going to teach my family a lesson, it wouldn't be through chaos. It would be through order. Every line, every signature, every clause would be airtight. I'd make sure that when I made my move, there'd be no way for them to undo it. I read Aunt Ruth's handwritten clause over and over. Only those who value family above greed will receive their due. Those words became my mantra. Samuel and I met a few more times that week. We reviewed every asset, the lake house in Vermont, the downtown apartment, the stock investments. He told me what could be gifted, what had to be sold, what could be reassigned. When I explained what I planned to do, he didn't interrupt. He just listened, then said, "If this is about respect, make sure the way you deliver it demands it." It was good advice. I wasn't going to shout, accuse, or cry. I was going to show them. I spent the next few days preparing everything, printing copies of the will, labeling envelopes with each of their names, writing out detailed summaries of the estate. But I also started working on something symbolic. The chair. I'd seen it at a small antique shop on the edge of town, a handcrafted oak chair with intricate carvings along the back. Solid, regal, timeless. It reminded me of Aunt Ruth, somehow strong and quiet. I bought it without hesitation. When the shop owner asked if I wanted it gift-wrapped, I smiled. "No," I said. "It's not that kind of gift." Back at home, I placed the chair in the corner of my living room. Every time I looked at it, I thought about that Thanksgiving night, the way I'd sat on a stool while everyone else enjoyed their comfort. Not this time. That oak chair was going to mean something. It would represent the power of being remembered. Once everything was ready, I called my mother. "Hi, Mom," I said, keeping my tone light. "I need everyone to come by my place this Sunday. It's about Aunt Ruth's estate." Immediately, her voice changed, sharper, more alert. "Her estate? You mean her will?" "Yes," I said. "There are things that need to be discussed in person." "Oh," she replied, her curiosity barely contained. "Of course, dear. I'll let Connor and Haley know. What time?" 4 o'clock. "Perfect, we'll be there." When I hung up, I could almost picture her already planning her outfit, ready to play the role of the gracious matriarch. She probably imagined herself receiving the largest share after all. She was the responsible sister. Connor would expect a substantial portion, and Haley would assume she'd get something too. None of them knew what was coming. I spent the next 2 days cleaning, arranging, preparing. I polished the chair until the wood gleamed. I printed official-looking packets for each of them, detailed summaries that looked professional but told a story that would sting. On Sunday morning, I woke up early. I made coffee, put on calm music, and laid everything out neatly on the dining table. The oak chair sat at the head of the room, facing the rest of the seats like a throne. When I caught my reflection in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. I wasn't nervous, I wasn't desperate. I was calm. There's a certain kind of peace that comes when you finally stop trying to be loved by the wrong people. At exactly 4 p.m., the doorbell rang. I opened the door to see them all standing there, my mother in her pearls and expensive perfume, Connor in his tailored suit, Haley in a pastel dress that screamed innocence. Even their postures were rehearsed, like they were stepping into a scene they'd already scripted in their minds. "Marin," my mother said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You look lovely, dear." "Come in," I said. "Everything's ready." As they walked past me, their eyes darted immediately to the oak chair. "Is that new?" my mother asked. "Yes," I said simply. "It's important." They exchanged puzzled looks, but said nothing. When everyone was seated, I took a deep breath, looking at each of them. My heart was steady, my mind sharp. I wasn't that forgotten girl at the corner of the table anymore. I began by thanking them for coming, explaining that I'd been working with Aunt Ruth's lawyer to finalize the estate matters. I told them Samuel would be joining us shortly to clarify a few legal details. Connor looked smug, like he already knew how this would go. "So, what are we talking about here? A house, savings, jewelry?" I smiled politely. "All of the above." Haley leaned forward eagerly. "Did she leave anything sentimental? I always loved her art collection." My mother cut in. "Let's not speculate, dear. I'm sure Marin will handle it properly." Her tone carried an edge, as if she expected me to hand everything over with gratitude. I kept my composure. "Yes," I said evenly. "I intend to handle it exactly as Aunt Ruth wanted." They nodded approvingly, unaware that every word I spoke was a slow fuse waiting to ignite. I glanced toward the oak chair again, feeling a small smile form at the corner of my lips. That chair would soon become a symbol of everything they took for granted. They arrived, dressed up like it was another performance for the cameras. The moment I opened the door, I knew this wasn't just a family meeting to them, it was an audition. My mother stood tall, every strand of her hair perfectly in place, her pearl necklace gleaming under the light. Connor looked like he'd just come from a board meeting, confident smirk and all. Haley, of course, wore a soft pink dress that made her look delicate and harmless, her favorite costume. They carried the same smug energy they always did, that unspoken assumption that they were the center of whatever story they walked into. I let them play their parts. "Come in," I said, keeping my tone calm, almost detached. As they stepped inside, their eyes scanned my apartment. My mother's polite smile twitched when she saw how neat and elegant it was. "You've done well with this place," she said. "It's small but charming." "Thank you," I replied evenly, refusing to take the bait. Connor glanced at the framed photographs on the wall, pictures of me and Aunt Ruth from years ago. "Wow, she really spoiled you, didn't she?" "She loved me," I corrected. "There's a difference." That earned a look from my mother, a brief flicker of annoyance that she quickly buried under another polite smile. I motioned toward the living room. "Please, have a seat. Samuel will be here shortly." They settled in, chatting quietly. My mother crossed her legs and folded her hands neatly on her lap. The picture of composure. Connor loosened his tie like he owned the place. Haley kept glancing at the oak chair in the corner, her curiosity barely hidden. "What's with the fancy chair?" she asked finally. I smiled. "You'll find out soon." Just then, a knock came at the door. I opened it to see Samuel standing there, dressed in a dark suit, holding a leather briefcase. He gave me a polite nod before stepping inside. "Everyone," I said, turning to my family. "This is Mr. Pierce, Aunt Ruth's attorney." Samuel greeted each of them professionally, shaking hands, his calm demeanor instantly commanding the room. He took a seat beside me, opened his briefcase, and neatly arranged several documents on the coffee table. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "As you know, I've been handling the final administration of Miss Calloway's estate. She left behind specific instructions, and today, we're here to discuss the final distributions. The room went still. My mother leaned forward slightly, her interest sharpening. Connor's eyes flickered with barely concealed excitement. Haley clasped her hands, as if she were waiting for good news. Samuel continued. Before we begin, it's important to note that Miss Calloway appointed your sister, Marin, as the executor. She has full discretion to interpret certain clauses within the will. Connor blinked. Wait. Her? You mean Marin decides who gets what? That's correct, Samuel said evenly. My mother's lips tightened. Well, I'm sure she'll be fair. I smiled faintly. Of course, Mother. Samuel opened the folder and began reading the key sections aloud. The will described Aunt Ruth's assets in detail: properties, bank accounts, art pieces. My family listened eagerly, nodding along as if mentally dividing the wealth already. Then he read the final clause. Distribution of all assets shall be determined by my niece, Marin Turner, based on her judgment of who values family above greed. A heavy silence filled the room. Connor was the first to speak. That's vague. What does that even mean? It means exactly what it says, I replied calmly. I decide. Haley laughed nervously. You're joking, right? Aunt Ruth wouldn't actually. She did, I said, interrupting. And I intend to honor her wishes. My mother straightened in her seat. Marin, this is a serious matter. You can't just decide things based on feelings. Why not? I asked quietly. That's how you all decided what I was worth, isn't it? Samuel cleared his throat. If I may, Miss Turner is within her legal rights. Miss Calloway's instructions were explicit. Her niece's interpretation stands as law under this document. Connor's jaw tightened. So what she gets to play judge and jury? Samuel didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence said enough. I looked around the room slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle. You know, I said softly. Thanksgiving was the first time I realized just how invisible I'd become in this family. You forgot my chair. Haley frowned. What are you talking about? You forgot my chair, I repeated. You set a place for everyone except me. Mom told me to grab a stool from the kitchen. My mother sighed. Oh, Marin, don't be dramatic. It was a simple mistake. No, I said firmly. It was a perfect metaphor for how this family has treated me my entire life: forgotten, overlooked, dismissed. Connor scoffed. You're making this about a chair? I smiled. Yes. Because that chair represents something you'll never understand. I stood, walked to the oak chair in the corner, and placed my hand on its backrest. The wood gleamed under the light, rich and golden. This chair, I said, belongs to someone who remembers who I am. They stared at me, confused. Samuel watched quietly, a trace of admiration flickering behind his calm expression. I continued. Aunt Ruth gave me a gift. Not just authority, but clarity. She wanted me to decide who among us values family above greed. So I've made my decision. My mother leaned forward. Marin, be reasonable, I cut her off. I am. I'm giving the chair to someone who's shown me more family than any of you have in years. Their eyes darted around, looking for answers. I turned to Samuel, the lawyer. His eyes widened slightly, though he didn't speak. You? Connor said, incredulous. You're giving part of the inheritance to some stranger? Not a stranger, I said. The only person who treated me with respect. The only person who listened. Haley shook her head. This is insane. No, I said calmly. It's justice. Samuel's voice was quiet but steady. Marin, you don't have to. I know, I said, meeting his eyes. But I want to. For a long, heavy moment, no one spoke. The air was thick with disbelief and anger. My mother's face turned pale. Connor's jaw clenched. Haley looked like she was about to cry. I stood there, calm and composed, as if all the noise in the room had turned into silence. Then I pointed to the oak chair in the corner and said, "That chair belongs to someone who remembers who I am." Silence fell the second I said it. For a full 10 seconds, no one breathed. The room froze, like even the air had been caught off guard by my words. My mother blinked slowly, as if she hadn't heard me correctly. Connor's mouth opened, then closed again, his brain clearly struggling to process what I'd just said. Haley's eyes darted between me and the oak chair, searching for meaning that wasn't there yet. Finally, my mother broke the silence. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" I said, I repeated evenly. "The chair belongs to someone who remembers who I am." Connor let out a short laugh, the kind that's more disbelief than amusement. "You've lost it, Marin." "What's this even about? A chair? Really?" I smiled faintly. "You're right, it's not about the chair, it's about everything that chair represents." Haley frowned. "You can't seriously mean you're giving part of Aunt Ruth's inheritance to him." She pointed at Samuel, who sat quietly beside me, his face unreadable. "I do," I said. "Aunt Ruth's will gave me discretion to decide who values family above greed. And the truth is, none of you have ever valued family. Not the way she did. Not the way I do." My mother's tone sharpened. "Now just a minute, Marin. You're taking this far too personally. We all loved your aunt." I turned to her. "You mean the same aunt you called eccentric for living alone? The one you said wasted her potential because she didn't get married or have kids? The woman you only visited when you wanted something?" Her face went red. "That's not fair." "It's the truth," I said quietly. "You saw her as a charity project. Connor saw her as a source of inheritance. And Haley saw her as someone to impress. I was the only one who saw her as family." Connor slammed his hand on the table. "You think you're better than us? You think this gives you the right to decide who deserves what?" "Yes," I said simply. Haley's voice cracked. "You can't just give money to some random lawyer, Marin. This is our family's inheritance." Samuel finally spoke, his tone calm but firm. "Actually, Miss Turner has full discretion under the terms of the will. She's not violating anything, her decisions are legally binding." My brother turned toward him, fury in his eyes. "So you're fine with this? You're just going to sit there and take what doesn't belong to you?" Samuel's gaze didn't waver. "I didn't ask for anything. I only came to ensure that Miss Turner's decisions were carried out properly." But I could see the discomfort in his eyes. He hadn't expected me to go through with it so literally. He probably thought I'd use the inheritance symbolically, maybe even donate it, but I wasn't backing down now. I looked at all three of them, my mother's tight jaw, Connor's clenched fists, Haley's tearful confusion, and I felt something strange wash over me. It wasn't satisfaction, it wasn't victory, it was clarity. I'd spent my whole life trying to prove I belonged at their table. But the truth was, that table was never meant for me. And now, I was finally building my own. Aunt Ruth's last wish, I said, was that her legacy go to those who value love and integrity above greed. Samuel has shown me more integrity in a few months than I've seen from this family in years. He treated her memory with respect. He treated me with respect. That's why the oak chair and the portion of her estate that symbolizes it goes to him." My mother stood abruptly. "Marin, this is madness. You're disgracing our family's name." I stood too, meeting her gaze head on. "What family? The one that forgot my chair at Thanksgiving? The one that only calls when they need something? The one that mocks my choices and belittles my success?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I continued, "You taught me that love has conditions. That being quiet makes you invisible. But Aunt Ruth taught me something else, that silence can be powerful when it's used at the right moment." Connor scoffed. "You've really lost it," Haley whispered. "Marin, please, this isn't you." I looked at her sadly. "You don't know me well enough to say who I am." Samuel closed his folder quietly. "Perhaps it's best if we end the meeting here," he said, his voice calm, diplomatic. But I wasn't done. "There's one more thing," I said. my tone cutting through the tension like glass. This isn't just about inheritance, it's about acknowledgement. That chair, I gestured toward the oak seat, will stay where it is. It's a reminder that I no longer sit at your table, you sit at mine. My mother stared at me, speechless. Connor muttered something under his breath and stormed toward the door. Haley hesitated, looking torn between loyalty and understanding. As they left, my mother turned back to me, her voice trembling with anger. You'll regret this, Marin. You'll regret embarrassing this family. I smiled softly. No, Mother. For the first time, I won't. The door slammed behind them, and silence filled the apartment once more. Samuel remained seated, watching me quietly. You didn't have to do that for me, he said gently. I didn't do it for you, I said, sinking into a chair. I did it for me, he nodded slowly. Still, that was bold. Maybe, I said. Or maybe it was overdue. He smiled faintly, his eyes warm with something that looked a lot like respect. Well, he said, closing his briefcase. You certainly got your point across. I leaned back, exhaling deeply, feeling the quiet satisfaction of a storm that had finally passed. And that's when I told them the lawyer would be receiving what they expected for themselves. Samuel looked at me in shock when I announced his name. The color drained from his face, though he kept his composure like a true professional. His fingers tightened slightly around the pen in his hand, the only visible sign that I'd caught him off guard. For a man who always seemed unshakable, that tiny movement spoke volumes. Marin, he said slowly, you don't have to do this. I smiled faintly. I know, that's why it means something. He opened his mouth to protest again, but I raised my hand. Let me explain. I turned toward my family, who were still reeling from what I'd said. Connor's jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. My mother's face was pale and rigid, the kind of stillness that only comes from fury you can't express publicly. Haley looked completely lost, her eyes shiny with tears she didn't understand. Aunt Ruth's will was never about money, I began. It was about intention. She wanted her legacy to go to those who understand what family truly means. But family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by how we treat each other, Connor scoffed. Oh, please, you've known this guy for what, 3 months? And now you think he's family? I looked at Samuel. He showed me more loyalty in 3 months than any of you have in a lifetime. My mother's voice wavered as she tried to regain control. Marin, you're upset. You're not thinking clearly. You can't just give away parts of an inheritance to an outsider. Yes, I can, I said, my voice calm but firm. Aunt Ruth made sure of that. She trusted me to make decisions based on character, not connections. Samuel shook his head, slightly, clearly uncomfortable with being at the center of this storm. For the record, he said, addressing them directly, I never asked for any of this. Miss Turner has full autonomy over her aunt's wishes. My role was strictly advisory. Haley sniffled. Then why would she give it to you? Because he listened, I said simply. Because he cared enough to see me when my own family didn't. Because he reminded me of Aunt Ruth, the way she believed in people quietly, without expecting anything in return. For a moment, no one spoke. The truth hung there like a blade. My mother stood suddenly, her composure cracking. This is absurd. You're destroying this family's reputation. Reputation? I repeated, rising to meet her gaze. You mean the facade? The picture-perfect illusion you've worked so hard to keep up? That reputation doesn't matter to me anymore. Connor threw his hands up. You're out of your mind. You're just jealous because no one ever paid attention to you. I took a step toward him, my voice low and steady. You're right, no one did. And now that they have to, it terrifies you. He glared at me, speechless. I turned back to Samuel and handed him a sealed envelope. This is your official documentation, I said. Aunt Ruth's downtown apartment, along with a portion of her investment holdings, will be transferred to you as executor's discretion compensation. It's all legal and justified. He hesitated before accepting it. Marin, this is justice, I said softly. That's what this is. He studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said quietly, "You're stronger than you think." I smiled faintly. No. I just finally stopped being small. Behind us, my mother's voice trembled with anger. "You've gone too far this time." "No," I said, turning to her one last time. "You went too far years ago when you made me feel like I had to earn my place in this family. I just never realized it until now." The tension in the room thickened. No one knew what to say. Even Samuel looked torn between admiration and discomfort. But I wasn't doing this for validation. I was doing it to end something that had been poisoning me for years. My mother tried one last tactic. The guilt card. "You'll regret this, Marin. You'll regret tearing this family apart." I met her eyes, calm and unflinching. "You can't tear apart something that was never whole." Connor muttered something under his breath and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame shook. Haley followed quietly, her head down, tears streaming silently down her face. My mother lingered a moment longer, staring at me like she didn't recognize who I was. Maybe she didn't. Finally, she said, "You're just like your aunt, always so dramatic." I smiled softly. "Thank you." Then she left too. The door clicked shut, and the silence that followed was thick, almost sacred. I exhaled slowly, the weight of decades lifting off my shoulders. Samuel remained seated, watching me quietly. "You know," he said finally, "you didn't have to use the chair metaphor. It was powerful enough on its own." I laughed softly. "Maybe. But symbols matter. That chair, they forgot it once. They won't forget it again." He smiled, the corners of his eyes softening. "You handled that better than most would have." "I didn't want to humiliate them," I said. "I just wanted them to understand what it feels like to be overlooked." "And do you think they did?" I looked toward the door where they'd all left. "Not yet," I said. "But they will." He nodded. "You've given them something they can't ignore, a consequence." "Exactly." I glanced at the oak chair. "And now it's exactly where it belongs." He rose from his seat, buttoning his jacket. "I'll make sure all the legal documentation is filed properly. You've made your decision clear." "Thank you, Samuel," I said softly, "for everything." He smiled faintly. "Just doing my job." When he left, I sat down at my dining table, staring at the empty chair across from me. The oak one gleamed softly in the light, unmoved, unshaken. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was sitting on the edge of someone else's table. I was sitting at my own. I thought about Aunt Ruth then, and what she'd think of all this. I hoped she'd be proud. I hoped she'd understand that this wasn't about greed or vengeance. It was about reclaiming something I'd lost a long time ago. Dignity. As the night settled around me, I realized something else. My revenge hadn't been loud or cruel. It had been measured, precise, quiet. The kind of revenge that doesn't destroy. It reveals. I stood, touched the oak chair once more, and whispered, "They'll remember this." But my revenge wasn't over yet. The next few weeks were chaos. It started slowly: missed calls, vague texts, messages left unanswered. Then the storm hit all at once. My phone lit up every few hours with a new attempt to guilt, shame, or threaten me into undoing what I'd done. My mother was the first to start. Her voice on the voicemail was cold, controlled, but underneath it was panic. "Marin, we need to talk about this lawyer nonsense. You're making a mistake. Call me back immediately." I didn't. Then came the second message, angrier. "You've embarrassed this family. Do you realize what people will say when they find out you gave part of your aunt's estate to a stranger? You need to fix this before it's too late." I deleted it. By the end of the week, she had stopped pretending to be concerned and switched to guilt. "Your father isn't sleeping, Marin." Connor's furious. "You're tearing this family apart. I hope you're proud." I wasn't proud. But I wasn't sorry either. Connor's texts were less emotional, more aggressive. "You can't do this. You're breaking the law. We'll contest it. You'll regret crossing us." He even sent me a message saying, You think you're clever, but you just made a legal enemy out of me. I laughed when I read that. The kind of laugh that comes not from humor, but from exhaustion. Connor, with his arrogance and his belief that everything in life could be fixed with threats and money, didn't realize that I'd already spent weeks making sure my decision was bulletproof. Samuel had seen to that. Even Haley reached out, though her tone was softer, almost pleading. Marin, please, can we just talk? You've always been the sensible one. Don't let this get ugly. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew what would happen if I did. They'd twist my words, gaslight me into doubting myself, and make me believe I was the problem again. I wasn't giving them that chance. Days turned into weeks. The calls eventually slowed, replaced by silence that felt both peaceful and heavy. My mother stopped reaching out altogether, which said more than any voicemail could. But the fallout didn't end there. Connor tried to challenge the will through his lawyer, claiming undue influence. Samuel called me the moment he filed the paperwork. Don't worry, he said calmly. We were expecting this. I've already prepared the response. And he had. Within a month, the claim was dismissed. Aunt Ruth's will stood unchallenged, and my authority remained intact. Connor didn't take it well. He sent one last message. You're dead to us. It stung, but not in the way it used to. There was a strange freedom in those words. I'd spent my whole life trying to belong to people who never really wanted me. Maybe being dead to them was the closest thing to peace I'd ever have. Still, the loneliness hit harder than I expected. Silence has a way of exposing the parts of you that used to hide beneath noise. There were nights I sat in my apartment, staring at the oak chair, wondering if I'd gone too far. But every time that doubt crept in, I remembered Thanksgiving, the laughter, the missing chair, the hollow feeling of being invisible. I reminded myself that boundaries always look like betrayal to people who benefited from your silence. One evening, I was sitting on my couch when Samuel called. How are you holding up? He asked. I sighed. Depends on the day. Some moments I feel empowered. Others, I feel like the villain in my family's story. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, every truth teller sounds like a villain to people who built their world on lies. That made me smile. You always know what to say. He chuckled softly. Occupational hazard. We talked for a while about the case, about life, about how complicated family could be. When we hung up, I felt lighter. Over the next few weeks, Samuel and I met several times to finalize paperwork related to the estate. But our conversations had started to drift away from business. We talked about books, travel, music, simple things. For the first time, someone wasn't trying to use me, fix me, or diminish me. He was just there. It was strange, this feeling of being seen without having to earn it. When everything with the estate finally wrapped up, I invited Samuel over for dinner, not as my lawyer, but as a friend. I cooked, something I hadn't done for anyone in months. We ate at my small dining table, and that oak chair sat at the head, gleaming softly in the lamplight. He noticed it and smiled. You really kept it as a symbol, didn't you? Of course, I said. It reminds me that I have a place now and that I chose it myself. He nodded. You know, most people don't take a stand like you did. They spend their whole lives trying to fix relationships that are already broken. I spent decades doing that. I said quietly. This time I fixed myself instead. We talked late into the night. When he finally left, I stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker below. For the first time in years, I wasn't anxious about the next family event, the next holiday, or the next judgment. The silence that once felt suffocating now felt sacred. I knew I wasn't done healing, but I also knew something else. I would never again fight to sit at a table where I wasn't wanted. But karma wasn't done teaching lessons yet. 3 months later, there was a knock on my door. It was late afternoon, a quiet Sunday, and the world outside my apartment was calm. I was sipping tea by the window, reading one of Aunt Ruth's old novels, when the sound startled me. Hardly anyone visited me these days. My phone had been mostly silent, my family's absence now just a steady, predictable void. I stood, hesitant for a moment, wondering if it was a delivery or a mistake. But when I opened the door, I froze. It was Haley. Her eyes were red, her hair pulled back messily like she'd been crying for hours. She looked smaller, somehow not physically, but emotionally. The bright, self-assured version of her was gone. "Marin?" she said softly, voice trembling. "Can I come in?" I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to close the door. The other part, the softer one that Aunt Ruth had nurtured in me, hesitated. I stepped aside. "Yeah," I said finally. "Come in." She stepped inside slowly, glancing around the apartment. Her gaze landed on the oak chair first. "So that's the chair," she murmured. I nodded. "That's it." "I've seen it in my dreams," she said with a weak smile, trying to joke, but her voice cracked halfway through. I gestured toward the couch. "Sit down." She did, her shoulders slumping. Her usual elegance replaced by exhaustion. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt heavier than ever, years of resentment, misunderstanding, and distance sitting right there on the coffee table. Finally, she said, "I didn't come to fight." "Good," I replied. "I'm tired of fighting." She nodded, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "I came to apologize." That caught me off guard. Haley, the baby of the family, the one who'd never admitted fault for anything, was apologizing. "For what exactly?" I asked, my voice calm but cautious. "For everything," she said, her voice trembling. "For the chair. For laughing when Mom made comments about your job. For never standing up for you. For letting them treat you like you didn't matter." Her eyes filled with tears. "You were right, Marin, about all of it." I stayed quiet, unsure whether to believe her. It's hard to trust apologies that arrive so late. She took a deep breath, her voice breaking. "After you gave Samuel the inheritance, Mom went crazy. Connor hasn't spoken to anyone. The house feels empty now, cold. I thought I wanted distance, but I don't. I miss you." I looked at her for a long moment. Her face was sincere, tired, remorseful, human. I could see pieces of the little sister I'd once adored, buried under years of family manipulation. "Haley," I said quietly, "you don't have to apologize for them. You were just a kid when all this started." She shook her head. "No, I'm an adult now. I could have chosen to be better. But I didn't. I wanted their approval so badly. I ignored what they did to you." Her honesty disarmed me. I sat down across from her. "So why now?" She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. "Because Mom finally said something that made me realize how broken we are." "What did she say?" Haley looked at me, her eyes hollow. "She said Aunt Ruth poisoned you against us, that she made you selfish." I felt anger flare in my chest. But before I could respond, Haley continued. "But then I remembered something. I was 12 when Aunt Ruth told me something I never understood until now. She said, 'One day you'll realize that Marin isn't selfish, she's surviving.'" Her voice cracked again. She was right. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The air between us felt thick, heavy with everything that had gone unsaid for years. Haley reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. "Mom found this when she was cleaning out the attic. It's addressed to you." I frowned, taking it carefully. The envelope was yellowed with age. The handwriting unmistakable, Aunt Ruth's looping script. My heart began to race. "She said it was tucked inside one of Aunt Ruth's old journals," Haley continued. "Mom was going to throw it away, but I took it. I thought, you should have it." I turned the envelope over in my hands, tracing the familiar letters of my name. The paper was delicate, soft from time. I hadn't seen Aunt Ruth's handwriting since before she passed, and just looking at it made my throat tighten. "Why bring it to me?" I asked softly. Haley smiled weakly. "Because I think it was meant for now, and because I don't want to be part of the problem anymore." I stared at her, feeling something stir inside me, a mix of pain, forgiveness, and nostalgia. This was the sister I'd always wanted, vulnerable, honest, real. "Thank you," I said finally. She nodded. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I needed you to know that I'm sorry. And that I'm proud of you. For standing up for yourself. I wish I'd done it too." I swallowed hard, my voice barely above a whisper. "You still can." For the first time in years, we smiled at each other, not the polite smiles we'd learned to wear for family photos, but something genuine. Haley stood to leave, glancing back at the oak chair once more. "You know," she said softly, "I think Aunt Ruth would have loved what you did. She always said justice doesn't have to be loud to be powerful." She did say that. Haley walked to the door, paused, and looked back at me. "Read the letter, Marin. I think it's time." Then she was gone, leaving the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. I stood there for a long moment, the envelope trembling in my hands. My heart beat faster with every second. Slowly, I sat down at the table, the afternoon light spilling across the wood. I looked at the envelope again, my name written in her elegant script, Marin. My fingers shook as I slid it open. And then she handed me a letter that changed everything. The letter was in Aunt Ruth's handwriting. Even before I unfolded the paper, I could smell the faint trace of her favorite lavender perfume. It hit me like a memory, Sunday mornings in her garden. The soft sound of her humming as she tended to her roses. My chest tightened. For a moment, I wasn't 34 anymore. I was 12 again, sitting beside her on the porch, listening to her tell me that the world could be both cruel and kind, depending on how brave I was willing to be. My hands trembled as I opened the letter. The paper was thin, the ink slightly faded, but her voice came through clearly in every word. "My dearest Marin, if you're reading this, it means time has taken me where it takes everyone. But I want you to know that even in death, I've left you with something more than an inheritance. I've left you with truth. You've spent your life in the shadow of people who mistake silence for weakness. They do not understand the strength it takes to endure without acknowledgement. They have built their lives around being seen. You've built yours around being real. I've watched the way your family treats you, the way your mother measures love in appearances, the way your brother uses charm as armor, and the way your sister hides behind innocence. I don't tell you this to turn you against them. I tell you because I want you to see clearly what I always saw in you, resilience." Tears blurred the ink, and I had to pause, wiping my eyes with my sleeve. "I made you executor because I trust your heart. I know it's not revenge that drives you, it's fairness. And sometimes, fairness feels like cruelty to those who have never faced it before. But listen to me, my darling girl. Justice is only complete when it leads to peace. Revenge feeds the fire. Forgiveness puts it out. Don't mistake my last wish as a call for punishment. It's a call for clarity. I wanted you to hold the mirror up to them, to show them what they've become, not to destroy them, but to give them the chance to change. What they do with that reflection is their burden, not yours. And when the dust settles, don't let bitterness build a home in you. You deserve light. You deserve love. You deserve laughter that doesn't come at your expense." My hands tightened around the letter as a sob escaped my throat. Her words hit something deep, something raw. I'd thought I was done crying over her, but I was wrong. "There's one more thing I need you to know. The chair you always sat in at my table, the one by the window, is still there. I left it for you. I left it empty because I knew one day you'd find a way to fill it with your own strength. I'm proud of you, Marin. I always have been. Love, always, Aunt Ruth." When I finished reading, I sat in silence, the kind that hums with meaning. Outside, the sky was shifting into the soft pink of evening, and the city felt distant, like the world was holding its breath. I reread the letter twice, letting each line settle in my heart. For months, I'd been so focused on justice, on making them see what they'd done, that I hadn't realized what came after. Aunt Ruth was right. Revenge had given me power, but it hadn't given me peace. Not yet. I looked over at the oak chair. It stood by the window, catching the last of the sunlight. It wasn't just a symbol anymore, it was a reflection. Of my aunt's strength, of my own transformation, of everything I'd gained and lost. For the first time in a long while, I felt something that wasn't anger or pride. It was understanding. Haley's visit made more sense now. She wasn't just apologizing, she was beginning her own reckoning. Aunt Ruth had left us all pieces of a puzzle, and maybe I was only just now seeing how they fit. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Haley's name. My thumb hovered over the call button for a long moment before I pressed it. She answered almost immediately. "Marin?" "Yeah," I said softly. "I read the letter." She exhaled shakily. "What did it say?" I smiled faintly, even though she couldn't see it. It said that justice isn't complete without peace. There was a pause. "So, what does that mean?" "It means," I said, "I think it's time we try again." Haley started to cry quietly. "You don't have to forgive me right now." "I know," I said, "but maybe I want to." We didn't say much else, but the silence between us this time didn't hurt. It felt softer, tentative. After the call, I sat for a while, holding the letter close. Aunt Ruth had always known what to say, even now. She'd taught me that love didn't always have to look like warmth. It could also look like truth. And she was right. Truth had its place, but so did peace. I stood and walked to the window. The sky had darkened into deep violet, the first stars beginning to appear. I thought about everything that had happened, the forgotten chair, the anger, the confrontation, the fallout, and realized it had all led me here. Aunt Ruth hadn't just given me power. She'd given me the choice of what to do with it. And now, I knew what she wanted me to do next. I picked up my phone again, opened the family group chat I hadn't looked at in months, and began typing. "Dinner at my place next Thanksgiving. If you're willing to come as family, not rivals, you're welcome." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. I turned back toward the oak chair one last time and smiled. So, I decided to invite them all back one last time. The next Thanksgiving, the table looked different. For the first time in years, it wasn't my mother's polished house or her flawless dining room that held the family together, it was my small apartment. The place that had once felt too quiet, too lonely, now felt alive with warmth. The smell of roasted turkey filled the air, mixed with cinnamon and butter. Soft jazz played in the background, and for the first time, the sound didn't feel like a mask trying to hide tension. It felt peaceful. The oak chair sat at the head of the table, gleaming beneath the golden light. I'd polished it again that morning, tracing my fingers along its carved edges like a ritual. Aunt Ruth's words echoed in my mind as I worked. Justice is only complete when it leads to peace. I wasn't sure who would show up that evening. My invitation had been simple, without guilt or expectation. I'd told them they were welcome if they came as family, not rivals. Part of me believed no one would come. But at exactly 5 o'clock, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, my heart tightened. It was Haley. She stood there holding a pumpkin pie, her hands trembling slightly. "I made it myself," she said with a small smile. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. She walked in slowly, glancing around the apartment. "It smells amazing," she said softly. "You really went all out," I smiled. "Thank you. I figured if we're doing this, we might as well do it right." A few minutes later, another knock came. When I opened the door this time, my breath caught. My mother was standing there. She looked older than I remembered. Her hair was streaked with more gray, her eyes tired. She wasn't wearing pearls or her usual perfection, just a simple sweater and slacks. She held a bottle of wine in one hand. "Marin," she said quietly. "Mom." There was a pause long enough for 1,000 unsaid words to fill the air. "I wasn't sure you'd come," I said finally. She smiled faintly. "Neither was I." I took the wine from her hand. "Come in." She stepped inside slowly, looking around as if seeing my life for the first time. I could tell she'd rehearsed what she'd say, but the words were caught somewhere between pride and regret. A half hour later, the last person I expected showed up. Connor. He was wearing a dark jacket, his hair slightly disheveled, his usual confidence replaced with something more subdued. He didn't bring anything, not wine, not dessert, not excuses, just himself. "I heard there was food," he said with an awkward grin. I couldn't help but laugh. "Come in, Connor." He nodded once, stepping inside. His eyes flicked toward the oak chair immediately. "So, that's the famous chair," he said. "That's the one." He chuckled softly. "Figures you'd make it the centerpiece." "Someone has to," I said. And just like that, the tension that had hovered in the air began to dissolve. Dinner started quietly. We ate in near silence at first, each of us unsure of how to begin after everything that had happened. The clinking of silverware filled the pauses, and the hum of soft music seemed to be the only thing brave enough to break the quiet. Then Haley spoke. "This is really good, Marin. The turkey, I mean." "Thank you," I said, smiling. I followed Aunt Ruth's recipe. That name hung in the air, fragile and sacred. My mother's eyes softened. "She always did make the best turkey." I nodded. She did. From there, conversation began to flow slowly, cautiously, like the first drops of rain after a drought. Haley told us about a community art class she'd started teaching. Connor mentioned he'd taken some time off work to rethink priorities. My mother admitted she'd started volunteering at a local garden, the same one Aunt Ruth used to support. Each revelation felt like a small step towards something new, something real. After dinner, I stood to pour everyone a glass of wine. My hands didn't shake this time. I wasn't the forgotten middle child anymore. I was the host, the one who set the table, who decided where everyone belonged. As I handed my mother her glass, she looked up at me. "Marin," she said softly, "I owe you an apology." I froze, unsure what to say. She continued, her voice trembling. "I know I haven't been the kindest mother. I thought I was protecting you by pushing you to be strong. I didn't realize I was making you feel invisible." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "When you gave part of Ruth's estate to that lawyer, I was furious. But later, I realized. You were just doing what Ruth did best, making a point without shouting." My throat tightened. "Mom, I wasn't trying to hurt anyone." "I know," she said quietly. "You were trying to heal yourself." For the first time in my life, I saw my mother not as the cold perfectionist I'd resented, but as a woman who'd been raised by fear, fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of love that wasn't earned. I nodded slowly. "Thank you." Connor raised his glass next. I, should probably say sorry too," he muttered, "for being a jerk. I was angry because, well, because you were right." Haley laughed softly. "That's a first." He grinned. "Don't get used to it." We all laughed, then real laughter, the kind that doesn't feel forced or hollow. For the first time, it sounded like family. After dessert, we lingered around the table, the conversation flowing easily now. The oak chair remained empty on purpose. I wanted it that way. It wasn't just for Aunt Ruth anymore. It was for everything she represented. Wisdom, peace, clarity. As the night wound down, Samuel arrived. He'd been invited, not as a lawyer this time, but as a guest. He brought a small bouquet of white lilies, Aunt Ruth's favorite, and smiled when he saw us all together. "Well," he said, "this is a surprise." My mother actually smiled at him. "You must be the famous lawyer who got the chair." He chuckled. "Guilty as charged." Haley raised her glass playfully. "To the lawyer who started it all." Samuel shook his head. "No, to the woman who finished it." Everyone turned to me. I felt my face flush, but I didn't look away. I lifted my glass and said, "To Aunt Ruth for reminding us that family isn't about who sits where, but who shows up." We all clinked glasses, the sound gentle and full of meaning. When we raised our glasses, I finally felt like the one at the head of the table. It's funny how one forgotten chair can change everything. If you'd told me a year ago that a missing chair at Thanksgiving would lead to all of this, I would have laughed. Back then, it just felt like humiliation. A small, cruel reminder that I didn't belong. But now, as I look around my dining table, I realize that moment was the turning point. The day they forgot my chair was the day I remembered myself. It's been almost a year since that dinner, the one that started as a gamble and ended as something close to peace. My family still isn't perfect. I doubt we ever will be. But we're trying, and that's enough. Haley comes by often now. She brings flowers or new recipes she wants me to test. She talks about her art students and how teaching has made her feel like she's finally building something that isn't about mom's approval. I see her laugh more now, in that carefree way she used to when we were kids. Sometimes, we paint together on weekends, something we never did growing up because there was never space for mess or imperfection in our house. Connor still has his pride, but it's softer around the edges these days. He invited me to one of his business talks recently, and afterward, he said, "You were right about everything, you know. I didn't need the apology, but hearing it meant something. We've learned to coexist without competition." He doesn't dominate the conversation anymore, and when he asks how my work is going, I can tell he genuinely wants to know. Even my mother, well, she's still learning. She calls once a week now. Not to critique, but to talk. Sometimes she slips back into her old habits, trying to control, to polish, to perfect. But then she catches herself, exhales, and says softly, "Sorry, dear. I'm working on it." The last time she visited, she brought me a gift. It wasn't expensive or flashy, just a small framed photo of Aunt Ruth and me from years ago. On the back, she'd written, "She would be proud of you." I stared at those words for a long time after she left. I think that was her way of saying she was proud too, even if she couldn't say it out loud. And then there's Samuel. What started as professionalism turned into friendship, and what began as friendship slowly became something more. It wasn't fast or dramatic, it was steady, like the tide quietly rising. He never treated me like I needed saving, and I never expected him to fill the gaps my family left behind. We just understood each other. Sometimes, we spend quiet evenings sitting in my living room, both reading, both comfortable in the silence. Other times, we talk about Aunt Ruth, about how her letter changed not just me, but all of us. He always says she knew exactly what she was doing when she made me executor. Maybe, I tell him. Or maybe she just trusted that I'd finally stop letting people forget me. He always smiles at that. Every Thanksgiving since that night, I host dinner. Not out of duty, but by choice. The same table, the same soft light, the same oak chair, still standing at the head like a guardian. It never stays empty now. It's become a seat of honor, a reminder of where this journey began. This year, Haley was the first to arrive. She brought her signature cranberry tart and a big grin. "I promise I didn't forget the whipped cream," she joked. Connor showed up next, holding a bouquet of sunflowers and a bottle of wine. "Don't read into the flowers," he said, grinning. "They were on sale." My mother arrived last, a little early for once. She looked around and smiled. "You've made this place feel like home." I nodded. "It is home." As everyone gathered around the table, I caught my reflection in the window, the city lights glowing behind me, the oak chair gleaming softly. For a moment, I saw Aunt Ruth's smile in my own. Dinner was loud this time, filled with laughter and overlapping conversations. No one was performing, no one was pretending. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and real felt better than perfect ever had. At one point, my mother raised her glass. "To Ruth," she said softly, her eyes glistening, "for reminding us what family is supposed to mean." We all raised our glasses. Samuel squeezed my hand under the table. I smiled. "And to second chances," I added. The clinking sound that followed was soft but powerful, like punctuation at the end of a long story. After everyone left that night, I sat alone for a while. The remnants of dinner still scattered across the table. The candles had burned low, and the room smelled like warmth and memory. I stood, walked to the oak chair, and placed a single white lily on the seat Aunt Ruth's favorite flower. The gesture had become a tradition, my quiet way of keeping her close. Then I whispered into the stillness, "Thank you," not just to her, but to myself, for surviving, for standing up, for choosing peace when bitterness would have been easier. I realized then that I no longer needed anyone to give me a chair at the table. I had built my own, and the people sitting around it were there because they wanted to be, not because they had to be. That's what Aunt Ruth had meant all along. Her lesson wasn't about wealth or revenge, it was about reclaiming dignity, rewriting the story, and understanding that being unseen doesn't make you powerless. As the clock ticked softly and the world outside quieted, I looked around one last time before turning off the lights. The oak chair glowed faintly in the moonlight, and I smiled. Sometimes the seat you deserve isn't given, it's taken, and claimed with dignity.